Chapter 10. Pula. The strong spring wind blew clouds to us. They billowed over our lolwapa for some time and then moved on. "Rain, rain, Pula, Pula!" Tsotsi shouted as he gleefully raced around the courtyard. Perplexed, Madala looked up, held out his hands tentatively, and repeated his brother's words while discovering what he had long forgotten. There had not been one cloud nor one drop of rain since our arrival. Sand swirled up against the lolwapa walls. Spinning with the whirls, leaping through the gusts, the children danced to Pula, and Resakatli and I took refuge for our stinging eyes in the kitchen shelter. There the cat lay coiled up by the fire, twitching his ears at the intrusions. The roosters and hens scattered. Some slipped into Mamoremi's hut before the door banged shut. Others fussed and scratched up a settling place behind some logs in the shelter. Their trees and roosting place swayed heavily nearby. Among its green leaves the old, brown, crackled ones had hung tenaciously all winter, providing us with shade. With each blast of wind, the twigs clicked together, and a few old leaves finally let go, scudding across the sand, drifting into piles along the lolwapa wall. Seasons are different here. There's no sudden exodus of old leaves in the fall, no bare branch monuments to the dead in the winter, no jubilant veneration of youth in spring. Our tree regenerates imperceptibly, new growth pushing forward behind the old. Synchronous rhythms of growing and aging prevail throughout the winter, and the tree is never left bare. As in rural Tswana life, it seems that even in nature, age is revered. The experience of a life world is the wisdom of every elder. Resakatli shows Tiro how to distinguish the succulent, edible roots from the poisonous ones. Sipati takes her daughter where seed pods grow to show her how to prepare them to make shampoo. From one generation to the next, there is scrupulous care to use every potential in nature. Mamoremi's grandmother has taught her the power of witchcraft. Old Maria, fetching water with her daughter-in-law Marija, chides her youthful optimism by quoting a traditional proverb. Jackal brags, "I'm a fast runner." Sand replies, "Ah, but I have already spread." No matter what you think you've learned, no matter how much you can do, there's always more ahead of you, old Maria explains to Marija. Marija helps the old woman lift the bucket on her head, and the two return to their household. Sepati's dying mother, still in the shade of her hut, is beyond the wisdoms of life. Because she's in transition on her way to the Badimo, it is to her that the newborn granddaughter is brought for a blessing. Generations living together depend on each other. Now, sheltered from the wind and dust, I sat with Resakatli, and he told me his view of my society. Urban life changes things. When the young move to the city, they can no longer value the life of an old man. The family and the community are not what support them. It is the market that holds the plow for them. The shops are the center of the white man's life. They sell many things, and when people see these things, they say they need them and buy them. Soon the fat stomachs fill up whole garbage cans with things, and trucks come to empty them to make room for more. Yes, they throw out the old and get the new. New and young, that is the spirit of the white man's world. It is called progress. People even want to stay young. When the young of town visit the lands, they have no manners because they cannot see the elders. They only see themselves and tomorrow. But life catches them. Tomorrow arrives, and they are shamed to grow old. They try many ways to hide it because, just like old things, old people are useless. They look behind them at times when they were young, and they look ahead with envy at those who are young. Elders are not content to be what they are. They waste their years and do not live a whole life. This word progress, it is a waste of things and a waste of people. The problem of waste in our society was a concern for many people, I said. The problem, as he recognized it, was a result of industrialization and urban growth. Throughout history, many others shared Resakatli's wisdom and had written of the waste of human potential. It was true that as people benefited from industrial development, they were also its victims. I now eagerly recited poetry from Wordsworth and Goldsmith's lines, committed to memory with minimal understanding a decade ago. The world is too much with us, late and soon, getting and spending, we lay waste our powers. Ill fares the land, to hastening ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. These are wise words, Resachatli said. The Madalas of your poetry see that man can become weak from the waste of having too much. As you know, Mosari Moholo, our wisdom here in the fields comes from the opposite. The world is not too much with us. No, not at all. There's a Tswana saying, people of a stomach divide the head of one fly. That means that we, living here together, are all of one stomach. We are weak from the same hunger pains, and even when there is only one head of a fly left to eat, we must share it. The cloud passed on. The cat lifted himself, stretched, licked the ashes from his fur, and ambled into the courtyard in search of insects. As Resachatli and I emerged from the kitchen shelter, we met Molefi, who had come with news. Marija's older sister had been ailing with great pains for about a week. This morning she died. Had she seen a doctor or been to the hospital? No. She was tended by the family. He knew not of what she died, nor did it seem relevant. Solemnly and calmly, as though this were just another task of life, the old men discussed the funeral arrangements, and I stood in shock. To me, this was an abrupt interruption. A young woman dead? No medical care? I did not know her. Do I have to go? Do I have to think of this and be reminded once more? Again the confrontation of the inevitable. Again the need to support a grieving household. We found Mama Remy and the boys and gathered sweaters to cover our arms. Hoyt, out on an interview, would hear the news. He too would come to mourn. A procession, shuffling through the sand. In my society, funeral rites include close relatives and kin of the deceased. Casual acquaintances usually do not become involved. Sickness, aging, dying, and death are in the care of professionals, removed from our everyday presence. Professionals make plans. Professionals bear the responsibilities, and we send flowers, bake casseroles, make donations, continue our routines, and protect our consciousness from unpleasant thoughts. If this were not the case, would our individual and societal emphasis on youth and focus on progress and growth be possible? Could we rush to the phone and fill up the calendar? Could we successfully shove our mortality in the recesses of our minds to punch the time clock? Far away from all directions, lightning flashed. Even with a distant mountain and far-stretching fields, we felt closed in. Goats and sheep stood stiffly pressed against each other under nearby trees. Clouds gathered closer, darker, and schoolchildren raced home clutching skirts and jackets in the wind. Late afternoon storms often played themselves out on a horizon, but now several storms converged directly above us. A breathless tsotsi burst through the doorway, relieved to find refuge in the hut. "Father's home!" Rare occasion, the wind blew him in from interviews. By lantern light, Hoyt and Madala lay curled up on the bed for story time. Tsotsi grabbed a blanket to huddle up and listen. Winds brought Pula. Muffled by thatchwork, the torrential rain persisted. Its sonorous drone lulled me into half-sleep. Drips on the metal table roused me from my stupor. Here and there straw gave way to the force of driving rain. Pushing the beds together to a dry spot in the center of the hut, we tried to reassemble ourselves back into comfort, despite a curtain of rain now falling all around us. Then Madala urgently expressed interest in going to the fields. He climbed on my back, Hoyt threw a plastic cloth over us, and we rushed out through the downpour. Barefoot, I splashed across the Lawapa floor and ran the 50 meters, dodging thorns, to our green canvas enclosure. Nixon grunted mildly at our intrusion. Madala, never once taking his eyes off Nixon, climbed cautiously onto the seat as rain pelted in through the canvas flap. The plastic cloth slid off somewhere during the return trip. We arrived drenched. Strange feeling, suddenly a surfeit of water. Maneuvering the suitcases out from under the bed to find a change of clothes proved difficult because a stream of water coming down near the bed allowed no dry clearance. The paraffin stove was accessible. We held our plates of steaming beans, daubed with chutney, and felt some sense of victory, but the night was long and restless. By morning we emerged into bright sun again. Resakatli and Mama Remy rejoiced over Pula. Looking at the damage, the loluapa and hut floors were broken. Walls were crumbled. I could only think of the tedious repair work. As long as water was only a truck ride away and I had a chest full of food tins, this would be my perspective. At midday, Hoyt came for the first aid kit and returned to Nkabo's place near Mopane Hill. Nkabo's wife had spilled boiling water on her foot. Her foot had not been bandaged well and was badly infected. Burns are common injuries. On winter nights, when the blankets, goat skin, or flattened cardboard box cannot seal out the cold to bring sleep, some abandon caution to settle by the fire. They still speak of Kese, who rolled into a fire and did not survive. Summer storms bring lightning. It crackles and streaks the sky from one horizon to the other. The flash blinds our eyes, and we seek shelter in the hut. The next morning, we hear Radio Botswana news. 3 huts belonging to the family of Lekoma Nkwano were destroyed by fire yesterday evening. It is said that lighting struck the thatch of one roof. Mrs. Nkwano and 3 of her children escaped injury, but 2, Sebeho and Maseng, were killed. The victims were 2 and 4 years old. One child has suffered burns and is in critical condition. Resakatli spoke of the preparations we must make for the rainy season. We would hire a thatcher to repair our roof. Tabo and Polwane's son, Mosimanehape, would bring the cattle for us to plow the fields. Tiro Sejaro and Resakatli's new goat herd would be put to work preparing a plot for his herb garden. I, too, would prepare a garden, I added. He looked at me skeptically, which only encouraged me to verbalize my fantasy. I would get seeds from town and grow carrots, cabbage, beans, tomatoes, onions, Swiss chard, corn. Every bit of leftover wash water would go, not to Nixon, but to my garden. We would feast with fresh vegetables. Otlatza molomowame, kamaswana asenang sepe. You fill my mouth with empty spoons, Resakatli replied. Manaka, Resakatli's new goat herd, arrived. He's a boy with large, quiet almond eyes above wide, hollow cheeks. Beside other Tswanas, his mustard-colored skin is rather fair. The gaping shirt stretched across his narrow chest displays his skeletal detail. Patched, ragged shorts button tightly across his distended stomach. His legs, thin and delicate, contrast with his wide, bony knees. Thick knees crusted with grime like sturdy pads, pads like wide feet that have never known shoes. He is perhaps 12 years old. Resakatli does not know his age. Manaka's mother does not remember just when he was born. Since she dropped him off at our gate last month, neither she nor his family has come to visit him. Resakatli loaded a bag of mealies on a car headed toward Kopong, payments to his parents for Manaka's services. Manaka himself received nothing but enough food to stay alive in exchange for his labor. Dependent on Resakatli for food and slave to his every whim, Manaka, still a young boy, is emotionally alone. At the start he was very shy and withdrawn. The Tsotsi's attempt to engage him met with repeated failure. Yet when Monomaholo Sekatli yelled out, "Manaka!" he picked himself up and ran to the old man's side. Resakatli stretched himself out on the goatskin mat for a midday snooze, and the boy, on his knees, bent himself over the old man's feet, scraping calluses off the soles. Again, in the early afternoon, clouds gathered. There was a light drizzle. I retreated into the hut, only to hear tapping on the wooden shutter minutes later. I peered out to see 2 of my school children imploring me to come to our meeting place. The whole class was waiting. In the rain? Yes. In English, we did warm-up exercises and thereafter reviewed some English dialogue. I cut the class time short and told them it was not necessary to hold classes on days like this. Disappointed, they did not move, but sat shivering in the rain. Uncomfortable and unable to ignore the weather, I should have stuck to my decision and left, but their faces were glum, and Sejaro stood up to tell me through his chattering teeth that Pula was good for the fields. I've been here long enough to know that children do not directly dispute an elder. They would not protest my decision, but they certainly made an effective appeal. Perhaps catching sight of the broad white smiles across their wet cheeks was worth my change of heart. New school policy. Classes are to meet daily, regardless of cloudy, cold, or wet weather. They will be canceled only in case of thunderstorms. Tonight the sky is clear again. The boys are asleep under blankets and goatskins. Hoyt, Resakatli, and Manaka are out by the fire to keep warm. When the sun disappears, it can still get cold at night. I just went to the storage hut to find something and forgot what I was after. It was a sight of Manaka's sleeping place that diverted my attention. He had left burning a small paraffin lamp, which he had made of a discarded ink bottle and a wick. Its dim flickering glow cast light on the bed he had carefully laid out on the floor. A burlap bag covered by a thin piece of torn sheeting and a flattened cardboard box. Under the lamp, lined up neatly beside his bed, was a piece of notebook paper and a pencil. The entire sheet was filled, line by line, with meticulously formed loops and crosses, spaces, and tidy zigzags. Alone he found the resources to make his lamp. Was the silent Manaka now trying with pencil and paper to discern written language? Could this display of Manaka's worldly possessions give me a hint of his concealed spirit? Whereas I can learn from my ill-fated direct method of attempting to improve Moremi's living conditions, Resakatli's attitude towards his herd boys is something I cannot accept and to which I refuse to adjust. There are, after all, certain basic physical needs, food, warmth, and sleep, which go beyond cultural differences, but the Resakatli and I disagree on what they are. Woman that I am, in a male-dominated society, I must find indirect ways to influence Resakatli. I must employ a Tswana woman's art of persuasion. To begin with tomorrow, I shall pour him plenty of kadi. I will praise him and refer to the training he is offering Manaka. Then at just the right time, I will make him a gift of our extra blanket, suggesting that if he does not need it himself, he could offer it as a reward to Manaka for his excellent service. Resakatli accepted the blanket with no comment, but proved stubborn about giving it to Manaka. Sipati, I asked in exasperation one day, the Madala of my Luluapa can be too stubborn. How can I exercise my authority as Mosadi Moholo over Resakatli when I feel he's wrong? Brew more kadi, was her immediate response. Mamaremi brews it, but I already tried to give him kadi. What about your chickens, she suggested. My chickens, I queried. Your chickens. Resakatli is always scolding that you do not tend to your chickens, that you just let the meat scratch around the luluapa without cooking them. Resakatli, I said one morning, I see you're not using the blanket and that you have neatly folded it and put it in your chair to give to Manaka. Shall I carry it to his sleeping place for you while I go there to fetch the axe? I was thinking that perhaps we should kill a chicken for meat tonight. He watched me pick up the blanket. Resakatli, you know how difficult it is for me to think of my chickens as meat. Would you please kill this one for me? I said as I continued toward the storage hut. Cradling it in his arms, Manaka thanked Resakatli for the blanket. He leaned in the doorway of his hut, stroking the fleece. His face aglow with wonder, his calm, rough hands turned the edges over and over again. We sat by the fire that night, trying to recover from a gluttonous meal. Resakatli came for his vinegar, praised the meal, and retired early. Because the laying hen had changed her hiding place and Nixon had not yet found it, I succeeded in collecting eggs. Thus, in addition to the chicken, I baked a cake for dinner. My recipe. Place a rack over a paraffin burner, turned down low. Put a pot on it, covered tightly with another pot which fits upside down onto its rim. The effect is that of a preheating oven. Mix whatever cake-like ingredients you have on hand: flour, ground mealy, eggs, a can of fruit, some sugar, in whatever amounts you happen to have or feel right about, and pour into the pot. The cake, with, granted, an unusual texture and flavor, was savored by all, but is hardly a recipe I can send home. We sleep outside in the Loapa all week because Cabo, the man who thatches roofs, arrived to start the job. He leaned his hand-hewn ladder up against the walls of our hut and climbed to the roof with a few wooden hand tools he made especially for thatching. His teenage son worked on the ground, evenly stacking bojang, grasses, into piles. Cabo's father taught him the skill, and he, in turn, was passing it on to the next generation. Resihari explained that traditionally it is men who build and repair roofs. Although many families do their own thatch work because they cannot pay a specialist, the advantage of hiring Cabo is that his superb craftsmanship builds thatch of greater durability. His fee is about $1 a day, plus a midday bowl of mealie for him and his son. Other aspects of building a hut also require specialized skills. It's common, however, that many homesteads do the work themselves. Men work with wood, constructing wooden doors and window shutters and building the door frames into walls. Women work with earth and stone, setting up the foundations, building the walls, and smearing floors. Resihari said it had become fashion in some areas close to town to buy corrugated iron sheets to use for roofs and doors. To accommodate the iron sheeting, people had built square rather than round huts. Square huts with iron roofs resembled town houses. Perhaps bojang was difficult to acquire in town, but he thought that some people were not satisfied with traditional ways and vainly strove to look like, to think like others. He laughed. But a beautiful shoe can pinch your foot. If you wait out a rainstorm in a hut covered with corrugated iron, you will hold your ears tightly. If you escape from the hot sun to the shade of one of those huts, you will find it worse inside. With no space between the wall and the roof to let the breeze through, it will feel like a slow oven. Cabo's ladder is up against our roof. The floor of our hut is strewn with straw. Tonight we bed down in the loapa, but it is difficult to fall asleep under the nighttime sky. Stripped of all so-called necessities, life may be simple here. Yet this very simplicity, entailing none of the diversions of civilized society, often forces us to confront ourselves. This simplicity becomes complex. Looking up at the immense sky, I feel minuscule, like a spark that fades too quickly. We woke to daybreak and the rooster's call. At morning tea, the loapa was full of workers. Manako, Tiro, and Sajara worked bare-chested in the sun, while their shirts hanging off the kitchen shelter posts flapped in the morning breeze. They dug Resihari's herb garden. Cabo and son, both on the roof, worked side by side, brushing thatch with short, firm strokes. After sweeping, I continued digging my vegetable plot behind our hut. Usually bending over to sweep the loapa hurts my back to the point that I must raise myself again very slowly. Now, after the 2 jobs racked with pain, I groaned so loudly as I straightened up that I momentarily attracted everyone's attention. Resihari, dressed in his finest clothes, tucked his cuffs into his boots and, pushing his bicycle, walked over to me. "1 hair from your head may draw more than a team of oxen, but if you pull too hard, you will break it." That said, he straddled his bicycle and rode off on the path to his lovely Mosadi in Mohoditsani. Propping a pillow against my back, I sat in the sun watching the boys, who now, aware of the old man's absence, interrupted their digging to tussle in the sand. The sun was still low. Laundry was piled up. Our bedding full of dust was bunched up by the crumbled wall. Madala, stick in hand, poked the long, fat chungalurus inching their way across the cracked floor. There was really no point in sweeping the loose dust back and forth. The wall needed rebuilding. the floor re-smearing. Mama Remy was fetching water for the midday mealie pot. For just the two of us, there was too much work to be done. Perhaps Sepati and Tataba or Maria might come by to lend a helping hand. Together we could sing and tell stories while the work got done, but they were probably at their own homesteads repairing the damage of the rain. Were I a true Tswana woman, I would have daughters to help. Sepati was right. To live here, I needed daughters. Tsotsi, the privileged schoolchild, was not here to help. Resakatli was off to his girlfriend in Mohoritsani. Hoyt, appearing quite anxious to leave the chaos of the Luapa, cycled off down the sandpath. Modisi, I mused resentfully, would not alter his interview schedule to help me. Had he conveniently identified himself as a Tswana male and shunned this woman's work? At least Madala, contentedly in pursuit of the centipedes of the season, did not clamor for my attentions. Listless and alone, I sat waiting for companionship. No one came. I rose, holding the pain in my back, and headed for the mirror in Vesakatli's hut to see if I actually looked as old and tired as I felt. The stringy hair hanging limply to my shoulders was supposed to be blonde. The long, thin face was tan, or was it dirt? Eyebrows, bleached by the sun, were hardly visible. Squinting through small, flat eyes, I inspected the circles under them. Coming closer, I scrutinized the lines about the eyes and the wrinkles framing the straight, thin lips. Backing away, I recognized my part, Mosadi Moholo. This time, though, there was more pain than pride. This was a hard life. The image of myself before Botswana came back to me. It was not what I saw. Turning away from my reflection, I was ready to fall onto Resakatli's bed and give in to depression. How could I, just last night, distance and diminish myself to a fading spark, and then this morning be totally absorbed with and overwhelmed by myself that it becomes as great as the universe? Madala pushed the door and let the sunshine in. He wriggled with delight when I answered his plea for a bike ride with a resigned yes. We pushed on through the sand and the moshu trees toward the BAC farmland. I took a turn off to the right where I'd never been. We cycled away from the trees to a freshly plowed field. I stopped. Madala climbed down, ran off, lifted clumps of soil, and threw them in the air. He watched the sand break apart and scatter, clouding the clear air. We left the bicycle to walk along the empty rows far out into the open. We bent down to look at the stand of newly sprouted sunflowers. "They will grow this high," I exclaimed as I raised my hand above our heads. Madala looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. We walked more carefully between the rows. Even little Madala could understand not to trample new life. Madala lay down between the rows. I too stretched out to feel the soft soil. We drifted off, Madala to sleep, and I to the consolation of the warm sun. A tuft of cloud passed above us. How this landscape could change my mood. "Why are they sunflowers?" Madala asked as we pedaled home. "That's just the name of the flower," I replied. "They will grow large and bright and yellow like the sun, and like every flower, they need sunlight to grow. Everything alive needs the sunlight." "I'm glad I don't need sunlight to grow. I'm glad I'm not alive," he said. "Brian, of course you're alive. We are both alive." "No," he insisted. "If you're alive, you will die. If I'm alive, I will die," Brian repeated. "Wake it," I remember him demanding when he saw the goat corpse hanging. What had his 3-year-old mind understood when he played in the periphery of funerals? Like a Tswana, today the growing Madala observed that death was inextricably bound to his life. He waited for me to assure him that he was of a different category, something other than alive, and realizing that I could not, he was content to accept my assertion that it felt good to be alive, and then change the topic. We returned home in good spirits, composing a simple song to the rhythm of the petals. It was about the sunflowers, and had such a catchy tune that Brian and I sang it intermittently all afternoon. Goodbye, sunflowers, we'll be back another day. Goodbye, sunflowers, we'll be back again. Goodbye, sunflowers, we'll be back another day. Goodbye, sunflowers, we'll be back again. The afternoon was so warm today that it heated our water supply. Washing up was pleasant, but drinking was not. This is quite the reverse from winter time, when the water stayed cool. A quiet satisfaction has settled in. The rains have come. This evening we all sat on the crumbling wall to watch the brilliant sunset. Ntatabo, visiting us, leaned back too far and fell over, spread eagle, her skirt flying high above her knees. Resakatli howled with laughter and whispered what was probably some lewd joke in Hoyt's ear. When Mama Remy and I interrupted their laughter, demanding to know what it was about, they refused to tell us. Chapter 11. Witch Doctor or White Coats? The thatchwork of our hut is completed, and with a great sense of relief, we move our bedding back under its roof. Even though the hut does not offer complete privacy, at least when everyone else is asleep, we can close the door and feel alone. One night, when bedding down in the courtyard, we were awakened by a young man who came charging between our beds and tapped urgently on Resakatli's door. Resakatli lit a wick, opened the door for the young man, and closed it again. They conversed in hushed tones for quite some time. Hoyt and I found it difficult to get back to sleep and started discussing something which led to a disagreement. We strained to keep our voices down as our argument grew more intense. "You said that I said." "No, I did not. You're the one that said that." There was a slow, steady crescendo as we argued and refused to abandon our positions, whatever they were. Infuriated with Hoyt and frustrated and not being able to yell, I swung myself out of bed and stomped off in anger. Striding barefoot across the luapa, I rushed into the dark, open field. There, dancing with pain, I came to an abrupt halt. With every move, my feet felt sharp prickles. I'd escaped into a patch of thorns. Trembling in my nightgown, I stood in one spot ready to scream or laugh or cry when Resakatli's door opened and the young man emerged. I think I expressed all three emotions in rapid succession. Hoyt, who could see the horror on the young man's face as he spotted the figure in the field, would have explained the situation, but the young man flew off in desperation. I whimpered my way out of the thorns into Hoyt's perfunctory arms. Resakatli shut his door and blew out the wick. The next morning, Resakatli explained that the young man had been haunted and pursued by witches and had come to him to get rid of them. After a lengthy discussion, Resakatli determined that the witches had been sent by his brother-in-law because the young man had insulted him. To rid himself of the witches, the young man needed to perform good deeds for the wronged brother-in-law and thereby regain his favor. Resakatli promised to help him by holding on to the witches in his field so that the young man could return safely to his brother-in-law's home to make his amends and solve his problems. I commented that it was a fortunate coincidence for Resakatli's credibility that I stood screaming in the field. He shook his head at my ignorance. "Certainly I kept the witches. What do you think caught you?" "Thorns?" "No, no. Why do you think such simple things? You must look under the surface to find meaning. You cannot just look at what there is to see. Just as you cannot hear all sounds with your ears or smell all things with your nose, you cannot see all that is with us. And just because you cannot see something, that does not mean it is not there." "Thorns! Ha! Modise struggled with evil spirits in you. You ran to the witches because of evil spirits in you. You escaped, leaving them behind. Then Modise could welcome you back in his arms." Resakatli told me that I must try to understand the hidden powers in myself and in the world. If I had trouble, I could come to him. He would throw the bones and show me what I could not see. What we have here is a resident psychiatrist. Resacatli may not like to go to Gaborone, Mamoreme said, but Gaborone sure likes to come see him. A government official is here. A glossy black car with Gaborone license plates pulled into the crossroad, parked in the field, and a well-dressed Tswana emerged to greet Resacatli. The two withdrew to the privacy of Resacatli's hut for some time, then returned to the sunlight near the kitchen shelter, where Resacatli poured liquid into a basin. The man removed his shoes and socks. Resacatli spoke incantations about the blood of a sacrificed goat, and the man rolled up his trousers. Resacatli signaled, and the man stepped into the basin. They stood facing each other. The man soaked his feet in the deep red liquid. His eyes were shut. His arms hung limply at his sides, and Resacatli appealed to the gods. Resacatli spoke slowly. He framed his words with silence. Stand still in blood of the slaughtered goat. It dies, so you shall live. Your heart is sick. Your blood is weak. You tire and feel pain. Medicals cannot reach you. What do doctors know? They are men. I speak to Modimo. I speak to the Badimo. There is peace in the great unknown. Your fate lives with gods, and so lives the fate of all mankind. Stand still in the blood of the slaughtered goat. It dies, so you shall live. Resacatli's voice trailed off into a whisper. He motioned in silence and bent over to pick up the man's shoes and socks. He stepped out of the basin and with his blood-stained feet followed Resacatli through the dust back to the shade of the hut. We heard their murmurs behind the wooden door. He now gets his pay, said Mamoremi. Sometimes it is food. This time it surely will be money. Upon leaving, the visitor returned to his car, swung open the back door, and picked up a bundle off the back seat. He dropped the sleepy puppy on the sand, bid Resacatli farewell, and drove out of sight. The brown, furry dog shook its body and floppy ears. Wagging its tail and yapping, it bounded towards Tsotsi. It jumped, rolled, and ran circles round his beckoning gestures. The man had been to the doctors and the hospital in town, Resacatli explained, but they could not cure him. He was still a young man, yet he had a very bad heart. Resacatli had treated him, but his condition was poor. He would not live long. He's a man from town, Resacatli continued. He paid me well, and he gave me the dog. She's a fat one, like the dogs in town, and she has a name, Susie. Resacatli looked on as Tsotsi and Susie took off with the tennis ball. Resacatli has tolerantly left Susie to Tsotsi's affections. Nevertheless, Hoyt and I impressed on Keith the wisdom of feeding her clandestinely. Where food and water are scarce, dogs and cats are left to find their own meals and are thrown leftovers only now and then. The cat here does quite well. He stalks about at night catching bugs and bats and keeps the Luluapa clear of lizards and snakes. Dogs, however, find little in nature to supplement their occasional feedings. They stray lifelessly between homesteads and receive a bare minimum of sustenance. Tsotsi sneaks Susie a dish of leftovers every night after dinner. She sleeps curled on the floor by his bed. During the day, she's full of vigor and seeks her entertainment until Tsotsi returns from school, and she resumes her place by his side. Bounding toward a sleeping Tswana dog, she entices him to play. She wiggles, bows, and barks joyfully to introduce herself and is greeted by a fierce snarl in return. Not easily deterred, she tries again. Impatient with her persistence, the dog painfully raises himself. With hollow rib cage, he assumes his most hostile stance, bares his teeth, and growls at her. She cowers, tail between her legs, and from a distance stares bewildered at what she mistook for her own species. The rooster's another thing. He responds to her overtures with flapping wings and a flashing beak. Like prize fighters, they face off. But since neither can appreciate the equipment and strategy of the other, their energies are wasted. Exhausted, they retreat to their corners, calling it a draw. There'll be a rematch tomorrow. Susie's attached herself to us and follows us like a faithful pet. On days that Modise has no interviews, Tsotsi and Madala rouse him to go with them to look at cars. Susie bounds back and forth between Hoyt and the boys as they walk past the crossroads and disappear down the dirt road leading to the main road from Gaborone to Francistown. Besides local traffic, they watch tourists from South Africa speeding by as they head for the game parks in the north. Ressagatli saw Hoyt and the boys on a recent outing and has entertained many a visitor with his fireside story. One of those Mahoa cars sped toward Modise, Tsotsi, and Madala by the roadside. Like gold in the sun, it flashed toward them. The white, hairy arm of a fat stomach shot out of the car windows as it passed, and candies flew through the air. Tsotsi and Madala knew what to do. They scrambled quickly into the grasses, grubbing around for every sweet. A confused Modise looked to the T.J. Johannesburg license plate and scratched his head. The car screeched to a stop, backed up, and stopped again. The pink, twisted face of the white, hairy arm popped out of the window to stare at our Modise. Ha! Poor Modise is the wrong color. No more candies. The car sped away. Our Tsotsi and Madala found the Tswana Santa, but Modise, ha! He is just a starving native. Occasionally, Ressagatli leads a young woman toward me who, he explains, has never seen a white person before. I find this difficult to believe, but he insists that she has led a sheltered existence far out in the bush. She haltingly steps forward when Ressagatli drops her hand, looks shyly into my eyes, and retreats quickly before I can shake her hand. She comes back to my side. We sit together, and before she leaves she takes my hand to say goodbye. Our 3-year-old, and Ressagatli's wise Madala concludes, "Mommy, we're a funny yellowy color, aren't we?" For only one person has our skin color caused concern here. A woman from another village comes to buy herbs and snuff from Ressagatli. After her first visit, Ressagatli explained to me that for most of her life this woman had worked as a servant on an Afrikaans farm in South Africa. She'd been treated badly. Skin color alone would probably always be a significant issue for her. On her next visit, I greeted her with special deference, but she refused my hand, calling me a Caribe, young woman. Insulted, I corrected her, asserting my status as Mosadi Moholo. Ressagatli nodded his approval. She went on to express her negative feelings about white women, and turning to me, asserted that white women were spoiled. They do not work. Their hands are smooth and lazy. Forcefully, she grabbed my hand and pulled it in front of Ressagatli's face. She displayed my hand, a large, bony hand with knuckles heavily accented by the dirt in their crevices. The nails, broken and torn, held the grime which also outlined the rough cuticles. She turned it. Pads, soiled a soft brown, circled the lines of a light lechoa, white one's, palm. Ressagatli nodded his approval. He threw down my hand, conceding nothing, while I, glad to have passed her test, decided then and there to buy hand cream on the next trip to town. Madala toddles over to us for attention. He hugs and kisses me. He hugs and kisses Ressagatli, and heads for our visitor to complete his round. "He cannot kiss me. He is white," she's adamant. Ressagatli sweeps up his Madala and hugs him generously. Lekoto, Tiro's oldest brother, is one of the 2 children that our neighbors Polwane and Tabo have sent to school. It was Lekoto who took Keith to school the first day. He's in Standard 7, the last grade at elementary level, and will soon take national examinations to determine whether he'll be admitted to secondary school. For the last few days he's been coming to me for extra tutoring because he, quite rightly, perceives that his chances of doing well are poor. The village school he attends has teachers who are only minimally qualified. Lekoto is determined to go to secondary school not only to achieve earning power for himself, but also to fulfill his familial obligations. His parents are willing to sacrifice to pay his school fees, and it's understood that Lekoto in return will one day be able to provide school fees for the youngest children and offer financial help when the family needs it. Lekoto failed to show up for his tutoring session after dinner tonight. Instead, Tabo came with news. His wife Pulwane had been sick for several days. She was becoming progressively worse. It now appeared that Lekoto and his sister Lerato were coming down with the same sickness. This night they lay shivering in their blankets by the fire, unable to get warm. Resakatli told Tabo that he did not have an adequate supply of medicine for treatment. It would be best if they could go to Mohoditsani to see the European doctor. We agreed that I would drive them there the following morning. Early the next morning, Tabo rushed into the Loapa to summon help. Hoyt and Resakatli followed him home. By the time I got there, Pulwane had come out of a fainting spell. The men lifted her into our car. Lekoto and Lerato climbed in beside their mother. I headed straight for the hospital in the Gaborone. A bench of bodies wound around the walls of the waiting room. Pulwane, wrapped in her plaid blanket, found space between an old man holding his head and a woman breastfeeding her infant. Folding his long legs beneath him, Lekoto slumped down onto the concrete floor, rested his back and head against the wall, and closed his eyes. Lerato stood near the bench, leaning against the wall and waiting for a space to sit down. A middle-aged woman untied her pink headscarf, wiped her perspiring forehead, and, squirming to find comfort, shifted the weight of her heavy body on her one spot. Beside her, a boy dangled his bony bare feet from the bench. Like two pendulums in opposition marking time, they moved evenly backward and forward. Scrambling on the floor near her mother, a toddler coughed and caught the mucus from her draining nose on a dirty sleeve. Two women, who before were leaning against the entranceway in discussion, sat listlessly huddled in their blankets. These were the rural and urban sick. These were the poor. There was not one bureaucrat, not one uniform, not one white face among them. More people came in, some finding no place to settle, crowded near the entranceway. I left the room to walk and found another waiting room. Here was, exclusively, a clientele not represented in the other room. They sat in chairs with magazines and crossed legs. Some chairs were empty. A nurse stopped me to ask if I had an appointment. No. Did I wish to make one now? Yes. Name? Pulwane Mulgwane. Then it is your servant who is sick. No, a friend. She can come herself. Good, I'll go get her. She's waiting in the crowded room. Here it will cost money. These are private doctors. Yes, I know. I have seen this hospital before many times, many places. Pulwane was already on her way into the doctor's office when I returned to find her. Lerato had progressed to the bench. Lekoto still sat on the floor, now holding his knees and tucking his head under his arms. We waited for Pulwane to emerge. What was wrong? We asked her. She did not know and appeared confused. They'd given her an injection, and she held out pills for us to see. She did not know what the pills were for, nor did she understand what dosage to use. I walked over to the Tswana nurse. Could she please find out and explain to this lady what the doctor diagnosed? No, she could not. She was much too busy right now. Why, if she wanted to know, didn't she ask the doctor herself? Because she only speaks Setswana, and the doctor couldn't understand her. My obvious protest trailed weakly behind her white coat, scurrying down the hallway. Pulwane, Lekoto, and Lerato followed me to the other waiting room. Here there were also 2 doors which swung open at regular intervals. I paid the fee, and we did not wait long. The diagnosis was pneumonia. Lerato was given an injection and medication and released, but Pulwane and Lekoto were both to be admitted. Their condition was considered to be poor. This way, a voice commanded to Pulwane and Lekoto before Lerato and I could take our leave. We watched them march away from us, white coat flapping behind them. Lerato and I returned home. Friends circled the kitchen hearth, sheltering themselves from the afternoon rain. They waited to hear news of Polwani and her children. Tabo listened carefully, shook everyone's hand solemnly, put his arm around Lerato, and led her home. Polwani and Lekoto in the hospital. Injections and pills as usual, Molefi acridly remarked. No matter what the complaint, eyes, stomach, back, or head, they give the same injection, Sepati elaborated in the same tone. Injection, injection, and Tabo and Marija joined the chorus. And what are those pills? We will not swallow what we do not know. We throw them away. What is wrong with those white coat doctors? Maria asked me. They look at us from behind a desk. They refuse to touch us. They use metal, rubber, or wood, anything but their own hands. They mumble, injection, send us out, and think they've done a great thing. No one tells us what is wrong, what they are doing, or why. We file in like cattle. They do not greet. They do not talk or explain. They think we, like cattle, cannot understand, Mamoremi added. With witch doctors it is different, Maria went on. They listen, they talk. They respect our bodies and our minds. They tell us what is happening, why it hurts, what we must do and why. They tell us how the medicine works. Silent among them all, Resakatli did not respond to the outbursts of discontent. It was not until I asked them why they even went to the white doctors that Resakatli spoke. No medicals are magic. No doctors know all. When a sick person comes to me, I find what is wrong and give good medicals. But it is not so simple. I do not have all medicals. And if a person is very sick, he must try everything, even the white coats. I tell this to you, but many of you refuse to go to European doctors. Now often patients of the hospital are unsatisfied, he continued, and they come to me afterwards. Injections and pills are not magic. Sometimes I can heal them when the white coat doctors have failed. Sometimes we both fail. There is no cure. Then I will use the bones and talk to the spirits. That is a powerful way to attack the sickness, which European doctors do not understand. Ruri, for sure, Clary chimed in. You, Resakatli, may know these doctors, but they do not see you. They think witch doctors are evil. I know this because I've heard them say this. That is their problem, not ours, Neo joined in. No, Resakatli disagreed. It is our problem too. Just as I have powers they do not understand. The white coats sit on heaps of medicals that I cannot grow or find in the bush. It's good Polwani and Lekoto will get some of their medicals, and if they return sick, I will call on the spirits and treat them also. When Polwani was finally released from the hospital and returned home, she brought a message for Hoyt. Lekoto, still very ill in the hospital, had summoned Modise to his bedside. Hoyt left that same afternoon. During a fitful night, Lekoto had struggled with high fever and violent headaches. He had what he described to Modise as a powerful vision. He'd seen dark clouds rolling death toward him. He ran to free himself and cried out for help. A voice broke in. To save himself, he was to offer a sacrifice. His father, brothers, and the rest of his family appeared, and he saw Modise sitting by the fire with them. I will slaughter a goat for Modise, Lekoto promised. He repeated these words, and the darkness lifted. He opened his eyes to find himself awake, staring at bare hospital walls. He was alive. For the first time in several days he believed he would survive. Modise, Lekoto said, when I'm cured, and on the very day that I return home, I will choose my best animal to slaughter for you. Lekoto coughed, caught his breath, and waited for Modise's response. Modise assured him that he would recover his health, even without a sacrifice. No, Lekoto demanded. You are Modise, a shepherd among men and a great friend of my father. I wish you to accept the promise that healed my sickness. It will be good for my future. This the vision has told me. I, too, must be a shepherd for my father's family. I must be well and pass the examinations. One day I will get a job to help my family." Modise accepted Lekoto's promise, embraced him, and took leave of him. It is to family, close friends, and trusted community members that a Tswana turns for support in times of crisis. Lekoto's vision, his words and intentions have strengthened our bond of affection toward our neighbors, Tabo's family. With them we wait for Lekoto's recovery. We share the determination that he fulfill his commitment toward himself and his family. Still no word about Lekoto's progress. We hope he'll recover in time to take the examinations. Yesterday, when I went to the miller's to take a shower, I left Madala playing outside in the yard. Just before leaving, I filled up the water containers while he entertained himself rolling our spare tire in the driveway. We drove off, inadvertently leaving the tire behind. I was away teaching when Hoyt arrived home to discover the spare tire missing. After consulting Resakatli, the two men came to the conclusion that the spare tire had been stolen. As Modise worried over the financial loss, Resakatli assured him that he would find the culprit and recover his loss. He tossed the bones onto the Lawapa floor. The thief lived in Kopong and had 2 wives. He would cast an evil spell on the thief to riddle him with misfortune. Thus, in order to change his circumstances, the thief would be forced to return the tire. While not entirely convinced, Modise enjoyed Resakatli's support, so much so that he looked like a true believer. There was some chagrin when, upon my return, I announced that the spare tire was left behind in the miller's driveway. Resakatli reminded us that all doctors make mistakes from time to time. He was no exception. We noticed that he was careful to call back the evil spirits that he'd sent out to the suspect in Kopong. The children bring mopane worms to munch on during class. Sitting near me, Kubuamang crunched and crackled her handful of worms and popped them into her mouth. I've tried to explain that I don't care to eat any, yet she continues to offer me a portion every day. To convince her, I must point to my stomach to tell her I'm sick. She would not understand any other reason for turning away food. When days of hunger are remembered, accepted, and expected again, any edible morsel is savored. The seeds of my garden have sprouted, and the rains have transformed our fields. Resakatli and Taba wait for Mosimane to bring the cattle for plowing. Thorn bushes are outlined with new leaves. Ground cover vegetation has spread, thick and green. It is a feast for the goats and sheep. Manaka and Sotsi have a difficult time corralling them at sundown. Approaching the narrow entrance to the kraal, the goats and sheep push sideways frantically to escape capture. Spying the open fields, they bound away to settle in a patch of succulent grasses. Those jammed in closer together, with no space to move forward toward the kraal, hop straight up into the air, landing on another goat's back. There's a protest of sound and a plaintive mang of their discontent. Hooves pound the dust, horns clank against the kraal posts. The fur and bristles of their hides and swollen bellies press against each other. One by one, the recalcitrant animals are squeezed out of the melee into the kraal for the night. We eat marojo, freshly picked and cooked. It is a weed now, abundant in the fields, and tastes like dandelion greens. It takes Mamoremi and me several hours to pick it, but our harvest amounts to a mere 2 tablespoons per person after the greens are boiled. Fortunately, Mamoremi has a strong back. My 2 tablespoons would taste better without the back pains. Resakatli assured me that if I had grown up in this society, my back would probably be stronger and more fit to withstand the physical strain of a Tswana woman's daily chores. As soon as they can walk, young Tswana girls exercise their backs, bending and pounding, lifting and carrying, while doing their household chores. Women rarely speak of back problems, although they do often voice other common physical complaints: eyes infected by flying dust and dirty hands, stomach pains and worms, often due to poor sanitation, and respiratory ailments, again probably caused by the dust. A favorite pastime for relaxation and indulgence, other than kadi, to divert one from the aches and drudgery of difficult chores, is the use of tobacco. Snuff in particular is coveted. A week does not go by without Maria, Sepati, or Ntatabo picking up new supply from the Resahatli. He fills their small pouches. They press a 5-cent piece into the palm of his hand and move homeward, sampling sniffs. Some nights ago, Mama Remy consulted Resahatli about stomach pains she'd suffered for several weeks. Upon coming to our hut to receive his nightly dose of vinegar, Resahatli pointed to the bottle of methylated spirits which we use for our lantern. He asked if he could have a cup of it to use for his supply of medicine. "For medicine?" I exclaimed, and proceeded to explain to him that the clear, bright purple liquid was highly poisonous. "Certainly I know what it is. Just give me a little cup," he retorted, highly offended at my lack of respect for his knowledge and judgment. I insisted that I could not give it to him because it belonged to Modise. Poor timing. Modise walked in at that very moment. Resahatli persisted. "Modise, I want a cup of methylated spirits." "Of course," Modise replied, and passed him the bottle. "No, Hoyt, no," I intervened and grabbed the bottle out of Resahatli's hand. This was life and death. Both men stood shocked at the bold intrusion, unbefitting a Tswana woman, and my usurpation of masculine power. "Resahatli, please tell Modise what you need it for," I asked. To my relief, he complied and explained to Hoyt that Mama Remy had come to him with chronic stomach pains. It was his opinion that she would be relieved of her problems if she swallowed a spoonful or two of methylated spirits. Surely we would like to help Mama Remy. "Of course," Modise agreed, and summarily walked out. That left me clutching the bottle, and Resahatli waiting for me to turn it over to him. "Resahatli," I pleaded as he took it from my hand and walked off. "This is poison. It could kill Mama Remy. Please don't use it." He entered his hut. I left mine to find Mama Remy. "Don't take it," I whispered to her in the Luapa. "It could make things worse, even kill you. It is poison." Resahatli approached with a spoon and the bottle. He explained to her that if she drank a spoonful of this purple liquid, it would kill the disease in her stomach. It was true that it was poison powerful enough to fight what was causing her pain, and the little she would swallow, he assured her, would do her no harm. Mama Remy swallowed it without the slightest hesitation and retired to her hut. "Hoyt, how much does it take to be lethal?" I asked. "I don't know," he replied. "You don't know? How could you walk out that door? How could you allow this to happen?" I reprimanded him. "Marianne, it's clear from conversations with Tabo and Molefi that Resahatli is highly regarded as a very good doctor. They speak of his many successes. No one knows of anyone who died from his care. Did you know that some say he has an herbal cure for a mamba bite? This may or may not be true, but the rumor reveals the level of his repute." "What's that got to do with this case? You are really going too far with—" "Marianne," Hoyt interrupted me impatiently. "When you go to a doctor whom others have assured you is exceptionally good, do you fear or attempt to decipher the prescription he gives you? Do you give preference to well-meaning friends who advise against medical treatment?" No, I had to admit. Mama Remy had reacted no differently than I would have in my own society. Why, Hood asked me, did I have more confidence in knowledge acquired through medical school training than in knowledge gathered through generations of experience? Mama Remy lay in the shade the next day. Towards sunset of the second day, Resahatli walked over her to tell her that she was recovering. She slowly rose, wrapped a wool cloth around her middle, and joined us for a cup of tea. Yes, it was still painful, she said, and yes, she was much better. After dinner, I went to throw the dishwater on my garden plot behind the hut. Horrors! Each seed and every sprout was uprooted and gone. While Mama Remy was resting and while all of us were out, the chickens had flown over the fence for a feast. While Resahatli could appreciate my bitter disappointment, he reminded me of his initial skepticism regarding my plans and seemed pleased that he was right. Lekoto sent word to the crossroads that he soon would come home. We decided to make Lekoto's homecoming a great event, and on a bright Monday morning, a group gathered by our truck for a ride to the hospital. Modisi was last to get into the crowded truck. He put the key into the ignition, turned it, and nothing happened. He tried again. Everyone climbed out. The hood went up, and a group of men looked knowingly at the motor. Modisi fiddled with the wires and moved back and forth from the hood to the driver's seat. I didn't pay much attention until it seemed clear that the truck would not start. "We can't drive it," Hoyt admitted defeat. "It just won't turn over." "What do you mean?" I stepped forward. "Of course it'll start." Everybody stared at me. "Modise, give me the keys. I'll do it." He laughed. Everybody laughed. I grabbed the keys, slammed down the hood, and headed for the driver's seat. Before I shut the door, I called to the Resakatli. "Resakatli, I, the Musani Mohola, will start this car, and you will see that I, too, have special powers." I slammed the car door shut and wriggled into a comfortable position. The thought crept in that I was providing comic relief, but I tossed it away quickly. "This car will start," I said to myself. When I turned the key and the motor started, I left the driver's seat and walked off, drinking in the exclamations, Modise's face, and Resakatli's silence. As much as Hoyt tried to rationalize the event in retrospect, the slamming hood and door must have jolted a faulty wire connection back into place. There was still no explanation for my brash intrusion. I certainly did not care to speculate on what had possessed me. Hoyt was convinced that the hot sun was getting to me, but I said to Resakatli, very transcendentally, "It's in the bones." Likoto arrived. He looked weak and very thin, but he was relieved and happy to be home again. When we sat with his family to celebrate his return, Likoto revealed to us that the exams had already been administered. But he grinned. He had not missed them. He simply left the hospital for the exams and returned to his bed when they were over. The whitecoats didn't know. The nurses were irritated, but it all worked out. Pula, we cheered his audacity. "How were the exams?" I inquired. He shrugged. Pula, we wished him success. While success to his parents seemed a foregone conclusion, Likoto appeared worried. He left us for the kraal and returned dragging the goat he'd chosen for Modise. It was a proud moment. Likoto holding the goat, describing the distinct patterns of its fur, and remarking that with this fur, Modise will have a fine pate to sleep on. The slaughter is scheduled for this afternoon. Mama Remy is brewing kadi again. We expect many neighbors to join us. The news of a slaughter travels fast, particularly now, just before planting, when grain supplies are low. I will join the women in song and dance and laugh at the memory of myself, months ago, closed up in the dark hut, holding my ears in protest to slaughter. Chapter 12. Fat Kitchen and Fields. No water this morning. Mama Remy and I have used large quantities in our extra chores, repair work, and meal preparations. There's nothing to drink. Tsotsi stares blankly at the empty containers on the stoop and leaves for school, like many of his classmates, without food or drink. At least for a time like this, we've made the right decision by allowing Keith to eat from the common midday pot of hot mealie at school. The children eat and share with dirty fingers. In contrast to other parents, we thought of the risk of disease, but willed our fears away. Hot mealie meal, the satisfaction to a hungry stomach, is joyful communion and a highlight of the school day. Madala finally stopped complaining of his thirst when I sternly told him he'd have to wait. Hoyt and Resakatli lifted the water drum onto the back of the truck, and Resakatli suggested I take Manaka with me to help fill it up. By the way Manaka held onto the seat and tried to suppress the laughter on his face, it was obvious that he'd never ridden in a car. As we circled around to get onto the dirt road, Tiro, who had just left the goats to pasture, waved us down. "Kibata lifti," he yelled out. We swung open the door, and he jumped onto the front seat beside Manaka. He did not ask where we were going or how long we would be gone. It didn't matter. For this joyride, he would abandon the herd, and if he were discovered, he would willingly pay the consequences. So they could get a good view of the BAC housing complex, I drove slowly around the loop. Sitting forward against the front windshield, as if propped before a movie screen, they gaped at the scene. Green grass and flowers, painted doors, houses for cars alone, And what was the blue water in the ground? Repeating my words, swimming pool, they tried to imagine what it would be like to immerse their whole bodies in water. We passed a field where 3 children clad in splendid riding clothes of velvet and leather sat astride horses, erect and proud. They trotted the horses to the roadside. For a moment their glances must have met the open stares and frozen wonder of the herd boys now leaning together through the open window. The water spigot was outside. There was no reason to enter the miller's house except to satisfy the boys' curiosity. They stroked the green-painted door and wondered what was behind it. We entered, one step inside, and they stopped to run their eyes along the smooth, straight, white walls, up the perfectly perpendicular corner, and across the smooth white ceiling to a light fixture. "Explore," I encouraged them. Their fingertips, one movement for light, and then again no light. Another room, a turn of the wrist for heat without flames, or were they trapped in the plate of coils? They pulled a shiny handle for cold, and another for cold they'd never felt before, a stinging, hard cold. Another room with the greatest magic of all, a room of water. Water of the pool to sit over. Water raining down from above. Water hot, water cold, pouring out in streams as long as you wish, or dripping slowly, or not at all. While we were out filling the water drum, the woman next door rushed anxiously over to us. "Stop! What are you doing?" I missed the initial greeting. "Hello, how are you feeling?" I translated into English. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded. It turns out that we have grabbed the wrong hose, not the miller's, but the garden hose for the lady's flowers. 1,000 pardons. Driving home through the BAC farmland, we spotted work crews out in the fields. We approached a pair of men working near the road. A Tswana man sat in the seat of a tractor, and in the field, tossing debris away from its path, was a field hand. I did not notice until we were closer that the field hand was white, with silver hair. He paused to wave, threw another boulder to the side, and walked over to my truck. It was Elwin Miller. True to Tswana tradition, he greeted. I greeted. The boys greeted. The man on the tractor greeted. I greeted him in return, and the boys greeted. We thanked Mr. Miller for the water and told him of our tour of his house. He in turn told us about their plans for the field. They were now preparing to plow by clearing the cluttered area. We bid our Tswana farewells. "Salang Suntle," we called out. "Tamang Pula," they replied. Our progress homeward was slow because we stopped to pick up every walker who hailed us down, and those we passed we stopped to greet. Where walking is the major means of transportation, it is custom to greet everyone you meet, to chat, and then bid a formal farewell. It is true that our vehicle might give us different prerogatives, yet these, in this setting and circumstance, could not supersede the human encounter primarily important to rural life, the giving and receiving of news. It was later that Elwin Miller told Hoyt and me about the complications of his position as farm manager at the BAC. Whereas he'd been able to establish very good rapport with the uneducated Tswana field crew, he found it frequently difficult and at times downright impossible to communicate with some of the British administrators and educated members of the Tswana elite. It sometimes reached absurd dimensions, for instance, when last I saw him in the field. He, as farm manager, and a young educated Tswana went to survey a particular field and plow it up. All went well until they reached a pile of debris by the roadside. Mr. Miller suggested that they get down off the tractor to remove some of the larger pieces by hand before attempting to plow up the section. The driver refused to do this, proclaiming that it was the job for the field crew. But the field crew, busy elsewhere, would not get to it for days, Mr. Miller protested, and the two of them could clear it in minutes, thereby completing the job. The driver continued to insist that this menial work was not part of his job and refused to get off the tractor. A Vermont farmer, Mr. Miller said, was never too proud to bend to the soil, and the same, he suspected, held true for a Tswana farmer. Mr. Miller jumped off the tractor and proceeded to clear the field while the driver rode slowly behind him. Eventually, watching an elderly man stoop in labor must have humiliated the young driver after all. For the last few feet, he grudgingly left the tractor to help finish the job. Mr. Miller observed that this educated Tswana no longer modeled himself after traditional Tswana farmers, but after his British counterparts in the hierarchy of the BAC organization. He'd often watched expatriate farm experts and bureaucrats orchestrating labor in the field while remaining totally upright and unsoiled in the process. When a young Tswana obtained new status achieved by education and position, he often lost interest in the needs of the common farmer. Instead, he strove solely to improve his own situation, reinforcing a divisive class structure and hurting the goals of agriculture. To Elwin Miller, it was essential for both the traditional rural farmer and the upwardly mobile, educated agricultural elite to understand that the labor of the hands was equal to the labor of the mind. Hoyt agreed with Elwin, but added that there were precedents in traditional Tswana society for social stratification. Even though many family heads preferred to control the plow, they enjoyed the unquestioned authority to order younger men to do various tasks. The irony was that once young men became educated and left their rural homes, they often continued to accept traditional ideas of social stratification while adopting Western standards for what this stratification would entail. They could thereby consider themselves superior to the uneducated rural elders. This stance, of course, limited what effect they, as professional agriculturalists, could have in persuading rural elders to adopt new farming practices. Ceremoniously, Hoyt and I presented Elwin Miller with a gift. It was to help remedy the problem of communication he faced at the BAC. With bright magic markers, I printed out Elwin Miller's message on poster board. It was an attractive poster and read as follows. Hona le mae mo boipelo le mai chanzo, mo kitsong ya tiro ya diatla, fe la jaca amuruteji watla chanyo e quadrodimo dimo. There's as much status, fulfillment, and dignity in the labor of hands as in the understanding of the highly educated mind. Elwin Miller tacked the poster on the bare wall of his office, but when he returned from a day in the field, he found that his Tswana co-worker had covered it with maps. The expatriate agricultural research team at the BAC has come up with a very few important agricultural innovations which it believes would increase the per household yield by a significant amount. Convinced of their expertise, I tried to persuade Resarati to follow their advice to plant early. Are they trying to teach a monkey to climb? What can these people tell me? They come and they go. What does it matter to them? They see one, maybe 2 seasons and decide the best way to plant. They say they have the answers, and they do not know, yet I have been here a lifetime, he protested. Certainly they say we must plant now. We have early rains, but what happens when the seeds have sprouted and the early rains have stopped? We on the lands have no other seeds to plant, and will have nothing left. The BAC is different. It is the fat kitchen next door to poverty. It always has more seeds and can plant again. It's easy to give advice if you do not have to pay the price of failure. Resarati, I urged, your good friends Maria and Molefi are allowing their son Tladi to plant their fields now. They decided to try these new ideas that Tladi brings home from his job at the BAC. I know this. For Tladi, things are not the same as for me and for others. He's gotten more seeds because of his job there. He can bring home ideas from the BAC, but is one-way traffic. What does the BAC know about our traditional ways? Tladi can plow whenever he wants to because he has arranged to use a tractor. But I must wait for my cattle. Most people cannot plow whenever they wish. They must wait for the cattle. Tladi knows these things, but truly they do not listen to him. The BAC Fat Kitchen does not think of these things. Should each farm have a tractor, maybe? Mossadi, he exclaimed. Where have you been? This is only for someone who does not know our life to say. If we do not have water or mealie, will we have gasoline and tools? And what is a big piece of metal to our life? Where will you find boloko to build your walls? I can say, Mossadi, you are too tired just now, or you would not say such a thing. A tractor here and there may be fine thing, but our life is cattle. Right now, my cattle are being driven home from the cattle post by Mosimane. On the way home, he'll stop at Sikaba's and Hosana's place, where Mosimane is hired to help plow. Then they will plow at Tabo's place as well. Mosimane will earn himself many cattle by the time he grows to be a man. He's a good worker, and no one can be better with cattle than Tabo's son, Mosimane, he said with pride. Mosadi Moholo, you still have much to learn. You will soon see what it is to plow the field. I'd not thought that the traditional timing for planting was tied to perceived risks, reciprocal arrangements, and the inherent limitations imposed by draft power availability. Perhaps agricultural experts had answers to Resakatli's criticisms and concerns. We would never know. The educated and the rural agriculturalists did not communicate with each other. They failed to respect each other's skills. Because their son Tladi planted early and we had consistent rain, Maria and Molefi's field sprouted rows and rows of young, healthy shoots. In contrast to everyone else's field, theirs already looked green from a distance. Resakatli and I listened to Maria describe the new variety of beans they'd planted for the first time. We rejoiced with her on early signs of success of their crop. Walking home together, Resakatli and I expressed different reactions to Tladi's innovative farming. Perhaps motivated by a tinge of jealousy, I compared their field to ours, and assuming their harvest would be earlier and richer, I concluded that Resakatli ought to use some of Tladi's methods next season. Resakatli made no such comparison. He was genuinely pleased that his good friends Maria and Molefi had a son who helped on their homestead and contributed to their welfare. That was as it should be. For him, things were necessarily different. The routine he had for himself was right for a man living alone, with no family to help harvest or eat. There was no reason for change. If he wanted to taste the new beans, he'd visit Molefi during harvest time. Given a good rainfall, his own field would be high and provide more than enough grain. The main thing is Pula. If it continues to fall, we will all be fed. If it doesn't, we will all go hungry, no matter when, how, or what we have planted. Walking at Resakatli's slow, steady pace, we continued homeward for several kilometers, and upon reaching the last bend, Manaka and Tiro suddenly bounded across our path. They ducked down into the high grass and bounced out again, leaping with laughter. Manaka waved his slingshot. Tiro held high the dead bird for us to see. Resakatli acknowledged their catch with a nod of approval, gave no praise, but told them to come by his place later on. He would show them another method for trapping birds. The rear hoof follows where the front has trod, Resakatli said to me. Manaka hunts food, just as long ago I hunted it on my grandmother's field. An empty stomach is good for a young boy. He carves the slingshot, learns to take aim, and discovers he can satisfy himself. Mosadi Moholo, Resakatli called out to me affectionately. Look there! Tabo's son, Mosimane has arrived from the cattle post. Mosimane approached, 2 cattle in front of his whip. He settled himself in the shade of the kitchen shelter. We left him to drink his tea and walked over to view the cattle. For a time they grazed in the field, but toward sunset they stationed themselves between the tall, long, needled cacti directly behind our hut. They eagerly ate succulent cacti leaves. In spite of long, sharp needles, they cracked and bit and crunched and chewed through the night. Was it the sounds of their lavish feast, or the night itself that kept us wakeful? The night, bright with moon and heavy, confined us to our creaking bed frames. We tossed for comfort until the rising sun released us. Piling my hair on top of my head, I stuck pins in it to keep it off my neck. Resakatli was honored and pleased that I sensed the excitement of the morning. It was the day of plowing, and I asked to participate. A few men who stood by the cattle did not know me. I felt the barrier of my white skin and sex as they looked at me and laughed when I indicated I too would plow. The men yoked the animals and attached the plow. Gripping the worn wooden handles, I leaned down against them. The cattle jerked forward. The blade cut the soil and jolted the plow. I held fast. My flimsy shoes fell over clods and stubbed against rolling rocks tossed back by our movement. Stubble growth and weeds scratched my legs and fell over side to side. My knees weakened with a strain of the steady forward pull. The plow rocked. I teetered and lifted my eyes off the blade to the backside of the cattle. There the motion was steady and smooth, the muscle machinery throbbing and bulging with strength, tails swishing with ease, and hooves beat the soil relentlessly. I tripped and faltered and fell away. One of Resratli's arms embraced my shoulder. The other swept out across our view. "We are the children of cattle and rain," he said. "Rilema lopetleke." We plow our boundless fields. All you see here, as far as the lone tree in the distance, is my land. We labor. We turn up the soil to catch the rain for seeds. When Pula comes, the field ripens, and the land gives me freedom. When a man has fields of food, he can be at peace with himself. Here in Botswana, a man's field is his greatest joy. Fields of maize and sorghum are what we Tswanas call the beauty of Botswana. He looked up at the cloudless sky. As always, he added, we will wait for Pula. Before the missionaries came to Botswana, there were many rain-making rites. The rainmakers stirred medicines in rain pots and burned them to send smoke to gather clouds. Children sprinkled fields with medicines. Women danced rain dances and sang for Pula. The whole tribe prayed for rain. They prayed at the chief's grave and sacrificed an animal for him, and so, too, they prayed to the living chief to make rain. The chief had power to make rain. He, as a descendant of the powerful Badimo, could ask them to approach the unapproachable, the great one, Modimo, the provider of rain. Missionaries changed our ways, he continued. Our chiefs became Christians, and we stopped making rain medicines to smoke clouds, or sprinkling fields for the Badimo. We prayed with the chief and the missionaries straight to the all-powerful one, Modimo. Yet nothing has changed. We're not blessed with Pula every year. Last season our crops died before they ripened. We must try everything for rain. We will sing and dance and pray for Pula. The chief of the Khotla will say, Ahone Pula, may it rain, and we will cry out, Pula, Pula, Pula. Brown, freshly plowed, our field catches rain and waits for planting. It is low and straight with rows to the western sky. All around our pathways, each bush and tree bears tender shoots that push higher and grow greener day by day. Grasses bend and glisten in the dew. Their wet blades brush against our legs each morning as we walk to the kraal. The ewe, with bulging belly, moves slowly toward the others at the gate. Nothing yet. We wait another day. We gather around the kraal and peer in through the fence posts. Early sunlight streams into the kraal to spotlight the event. There the ewe alternates her attentions between her twin newborns. Still wet and wobbly, the lambs have managed to rise and now stand balanced and trembling on all fours. One after the other, their limp forelegs test the air. We wait for their first faltering steps. A calling bird breaks the silence. It prepares to land on a nearby post, sees us, squawks, and flaps away. Aroused, the ewe maas and nudges one lamb. Jolted by the commotion, the other totters forward as well. As if to make room for new life, the other animals in the kraal crowd closer to the fence and stir restlessly by the gate to go out to pasture. Our routines abandoned, we drink our morning tea together. Manaka boils the afterbirth for Susie. She sniffs excitedly at his pot. We celebrate the birth in the kraal, rejoicing over the gifts of the season. Tabo and Polwane join us. Molefe, Maria, and Sepati hear the news from the children and follow to our kraal. Hosanna and Keledi cross the newly plowed field. We've not seen them since Resratli threw bones for their infant son, Modise. When Keledi sits to join the women on the floor, she unties the baby from her back. Hosanna leaves his chair to sweep the infant from her arms. Tabo must see that he smiles. He passes him to Tabu, who holds him high and shakes out smiles and gurgles. With each new day, Resachatli grew increasingly worried over the health of the newborn twin lambs. Resachatli, why are you cutting the lamb behind the ear? It is too thin. It's weak because of sickness in the blood. I'm bleeding it out, but it will not be enough. Leave the washing this morning. We must go to town to find medicine. We drove toward the main road to Khabaroni, and as we approached the BAC fields, I reminded Resachatli of the veterinarian, Dr. Milne, who several months before had vaccinated our Susie against rabies in his office at the BAC. The Europeans at the BAC are big stomachs. Resachatli. But Dr. Milne is not one of them. Husiame, all right. Turn into the BAC road, he conceded. This white coat in the fat kitchen may not want to do anything for an old Motswana like me, but if you, the Lahoa, white one, approach him, he just might give us medicine, and then we won't have to suffer Khabaroni. In his office driveway, Dr. Milne had just closed the back of a large pickup truck and was talking to a class of about 20 Tswana students who were settled into it. Resachatli, come with me. Let's go ask him together. Certainly not. Stubbornly, he sat in the car, commanding me to run quickly to catch him before he escapes. The truck was pulling out as I reached its window. Dr. Milne, I waved. He stopped the motor and leaned out of the window to look down at me. Dumelang borra, I greeted the men in the cab. Dumelara, I greeted Dr. Milne. Dumela ma, the students sang out. Dr. Milne, confused that my frantic appeal should be followed by greetings, looked at me in a get-on-with-it sort of way. Sorry to stop you, I went on defensively. I'm Marianne Alverson. I came to you once before with a dog for a rabies vaccination. Yes, he cut me off. I stammered. The pressure to dispense with Tswana etiquette, to communicate my request on the spot with no initial greeting or chit-chat left me quite speechless. What is it? He smiled gently. So sorry, I started again. He listened patiently. Our arrival, it turned out, had been timely. Dr. Milne and his class was starting out on an all-day trip to deliver health care to animals in rural areas. On the way, they could stop off at Resachatli's kraal. We'll follow you out now, Dr. Milne suggested. Dr. Milne conducted his class by our kraal. He examined the lambs and then the mother. The students asked questions, stepped forward to touch the animals, and gave suggestions. It was finally agreed that although one lamb was by far the weaker, both were suffering from starvation because their mother was badly infected with mastitis. Dr. Milne walked over to Resachatli. He spoke to him with respect, as in consultation with another physician. He carefully explained his diagnosis and every step of the suggested treatment. Resachatli knowingly agreed with him. Students were chosen to treat the animal, and we looked on. Pus was drained out of the infected area, and a shot of penicillin was administered. Dr. Milne gave Resachatli further medication, explained the dosage, and told him that he would return for follow-up visits until the ewe was completely cured. If, he added, at any time other animals were ill, we should contact him immediately. He would guarantee a visit within 2 days. She'll come out of it all right, Dr. Milne assured us. Good thing you came right away. So often we're only called in when it's too late, and when the animal fails to recover, our treatment is blamed. It's really extremely difficult to gain confidence among these rural people, he told me. We've just got to train more Botswana as veterinarians. That's what the truckload of students is all about. Tsamang Sintle, I called out to them as the truck moved forward. Oh, yes, of course, Dr. Milne responded. Sala Sintle. It was talk of Dr. Milne's visit, which spurred on a political discussion among the men in our luapa. Over gourds of kadi, Resachatli told the news of the day to Modise, Neo, and Tladi. While Tladi works at the BAC as a field hand, Neo, who has taken a few university-level courses, has been at a desk job. The tall, sunburnt one is a fine doctor, Resachatli concluded his story. Tladi agreed. We know him at the BAC. He's not one of the fat stomachs. He's like Mr. Miller, good for Botswana. I cannot call any white in my office a friend or good for Botswana, Neo complained bitterly. Their fat stomachs grow bigger each day, so that a Botswana like me has no room to move. The fat stomachs like it here too much, he went on. They do anything just to stay longer. My English boss has just fired Kebby, the best Botswana in the office. Why? Because Kebby was too clever for him. The whites will always keep the good jobs for themselves. No, Tladi countered. All whites are not fat stomachs, that is for sure. And all fat stomachs are not white. There are black ones, too. We know who they are. Yes, we know, Neo agreed. But who put them over you? The white fat stomachs. The whites, so that they can stay on top, fire the best Botswana, and promote the worst. Neo, Modise said. To me, whites have complained that they try and cannot find good Tswana workers. Expatriates come here with terminal contracts. That means they know that they cannot stay more than 2 years or so. They come here to help Botswana. They would like to train Botswana to take over their positions. That's what they say, Modise, that's what they say. Why is it that these Europeans cry out, good Botswana are impossible to find, and yet they do nothing to train us better, nothing to hire and keep the best they can find? Maybe it's because your idea and their idea of what's best is very different. No, I tell you why. The European likes to pat himself on the back. He likes to tell the world that he is the only one that can do anything. There was a chorus of agreement from men who had joined to listen. Neo continued, Why is it, Modise, that one European is always followed with the arrival of another European? Why? I tell you why. Sweden, Norway, USA, China, Holland, many countries of the world bring money to Botswana, and they pay for their own. An Englishman takes the place of another Englishman. Where do we Botswana fit in? Neo, Modise replied. A European complained to me once that his Botswana worker wastes the first half hour of every morning greeting and talking. It sometimes takes him a few hours to get down to his job. The European feels that this Botswana does not show an interest in the job, but only in his friends at work. To a European, it is a man's attitude toward the job itself that determines his success. Rubbish, Neo retorted. No job is more important than the man behind it. You're a man in virtue of others. That is just what these Europeans do not understand. They are in Botswana, yet they do not speak one word Setswana. They're in Botswana, yet even in English they do not greet us properly at the start of each day. You're a man in virtue of others, Neo repeated. Pula! They lifted the gourds to Neo's words, and the Resarale said, Neo, you are very educated, and you have kept Tswana wisdom. But you're young still. When you move to the big desk, grow powerful and rich, and drink whiskey with the British, will you remember that, yes, you are a man in virtue of others, and the others in Botswana must be our people, the Botswana. Resarale greeted us this morning with news from the kraal. One of the lambs was found dead and mangled near the posts. Resarale surmised that a jackal killed it, but did not get away with the kill because it was scared off. Tsotsi was eager to give Susie credit for chasing off the jackal, but Resarale was quick to retort, if that fat, lazy dog actually interrupted her sleep under Tsotsi's bed, she was too late. Just now, as I write in my journal, Modise and Resarale are digging in another row of posts around the kraal to prevent further attacks. Manaka is boiling the corpse for his midday meal. For fear that the other lamb might stray, Manaka has been instructed to keep it locked in his hut while its mother is feeding in the pasture. Madala is delighted. He has willingly confined himself with the lamb. I can hear his high, melodic voice from inside the hut calling to the lamb, Come, come, come. Whereas I readily accepted Madala's desire for a pet lamb, I can only express horror toward Tsotsi's fascination for snakes. With herd boys, he's recently enjoyed killing snakes in the field and displaying their skins on the Lollapalooza floor. It is certain that Resakali has exacerbated my fear with his warm welcome towards Tsotsi's newfound prowess. "Tsotsi, Tsotsi, oolululu," he sings out with delight as his Tsotsi drags in his catch for the day. Once Tsotsi returned home from school slinging a mamba. I reacted precisely as he'd hoped, suppressing no emotions. It had been found and killed in his classroom. He received it as a class gift. Although deadly snakes are abundant, I must remind myself that they fear and slither away from the sounds on the path. We do have a snakebite kit, but this can hardly be consolation, knowing that we are usually more than 5 minutes away from it. With the rainy season and warmer weather, all kinds of insects have improved the chickens' diet. One night we spotted, crawling on the wall near the sleeping Madala, a colorful, hairy-looking spider the size of my hand. My immediate shriek woke the children, who, just coming around from their world of dreams, were attacked by their father, scrambling across the beds in pursuit of the crawling beast. Madala joined my wailing chorus. So did Tsotsi with a staccato, screaming plea for an immediate explanation. Undaunted, Modise, in a tangle of blankets, leapt off the bed for a final lunge, and Resakali stood calmly looking in on us from the doorway. Modise, rather than kill the spider, took it upon himself to wrap it in a plastic bag and preserve it. His idea was to deliver it to an American 12-year-old in town whose passion it was to collect and study insects and spiders. Resakali went with him on this particular mission to town, and so did several women who wanted a lift to go shopping. It was Resakali who held the plastic bag as Modise drove, and it was Resakali who came upon the idea that the spider would need air to breathe. The hole he poked in the bag was fine for this purpose, but it also allowed the colorful, hairy thing its immediate escape. Modise was soon to discover from his passengers that my reaction to the spider had been culturally appropriate. He screeched to a stop, the door flew open, and wailing women falling all over each other made their frantic exit. That left Resakali sitting alone in the car, holding up the torn plastic bag and trying to control his wry smile. I'm bothered by what feels like cramps in my hands. They're beginning to swell, and writing is painful. Modise had left for a morning round of interviews. Malnoremi and Madala are pounding kadi roots in the Lalwapa. There are no visitors. The place is quiet, and I feel grateful that I can lie down. I lay in bed shivering with fever when Resakali came in to sit by my bedside. He was kind and understanding. He assured me that the sickness would travel through me and be gone within a week. In the next breath, with the same smooth voice, he announced that he was about to load his rifle. I should remain calm and stay in bed to care for my sickness. What he was about to do with his rifle should not concern me, he said. He had no choice, he explained. A patient had given him a goat's head. He'd been cooling it in his special black pot. It was sitting in the kitchen shelter cooling when Susie got to it. Susie had committed the unpardonable crime. She'd eaten the meat prepared by Resakali. The meat of the goat's head, Resakali reminded me, was only for the oldest of men. It was his privilege alone to divide the meat. It could only be eaten through his hands. How do you know it was Susie, Resakali? Probably it was Pig Nixon, I told him. No, Resakali insisted. Even if it were the pig, it would be a crime. Yet with the pig, I can say it's getting fatter and will land in the pot soon. No, it was Susie. She licked her paws and lies with a fat stomach. Susie cannot be eaten. This is a waste. She cannot do these things. I must shoot her. He walked out of the hut, and I, with my dizzy headache, followed him. When I reeled in the hot sun, Resakali commanded me to go back into the hut. At this point, Tsotsi arrived from school. Susie bounded toward him in her usual fashion. Resakali felt for his rifle and started to load it. he commanded Tsotsi to get into the hut. Madala blithely told his brother, "Resahatli's going to shoot Susie." Horrified, Tsotsi pleaded with Resahatli, but the old man was in no mood for protest. His reasoning was clear. Tsotsi persisted. Between them lay Susie, oblivious to her fate, biting fleas from her paws. Tsotsi threw his arms around her and tearfully yelled out, "You can't shoot her!" "You are a child, Tsotsi. You can tell me nothing," and Resahatli repeated his determination to shoot. Observing this spectacle, Madala gave his solution. "If Resahatli really wants to shoot something, he can shoot Keith." Intrigued rather than horrified at Madala's 3-year-old logic, Tsotsi placed himself between Susie and the rifle, proclaiming, "Go ahead, shoot!" Afraid of an accident, I tried to persuade Resahatli to put down the rifle. Words failed me as I struggled to keep myself balanced on 2 feet. I pleaded and wept while Resahatli rolled 3 bullets in his hand. Mamaremi passed Resahatli a jar of kari. He sat down, placed the rifle across his lap, and took a swig. There he was, with Tsotsi angrily defying him, something no Tswana adult will tolerate from a child. Madala, curious to see him shoot, and me, feverish and reduced to tears. It was not Tsotsi's heroic posture, nor my tears that won Susie her reprieve. It was Mamoremi. She poured him another, and then another jar of kadi. As time passed, he began to look at me in a loving way, and I knew we had a stay of execution. "Chosiame, today, because you are sick, I will not shoot," he said. "But if she gets into any pot ever again, I will shoot her for sure. That is certain. Now get back to your bed, Mosari Moholo, and Tsotsi, go to field. Help Monaka." It was time to blow out the candle. My hands hurt so much that I could not write my nightly journal. I tucked the children into their beds. Tsotsi pulled Susie up onto his bed and fell asleep stroking her fur. Madala, with a stick wrapped into his arms, slept with his very own rifle. The day had its impact on them. My fever did not subside. All my glands were swollen. Modise, the boys, and I went to the hospital whitecoats for the diagnosis. Tick fever. We were all relieved that it was nothing contagious and easily remedied with a series of pills. We returned home from Gaborone and entered the Luapa to find stretched across the floor, from wall to wall, a python. Resahatli sat polishing his boots while we trooped toward it, exclaiming shock, horror, and delight. It was dead. "Who brought this?" we turned to him. "I did." "You killed it?" "Certainly." He was emphatic. "What else do you do when you come upon a snake? Certainly you must kill it." I was planting the seeds, and this Noha snake was in my way. I imagined Resahatli, the witch doctor, wrestling single-handed with this 10-foot serpent, but he said he simply struck its head with a boulder and dragged it home. The sheer size of the python made us shudder. We'd seen similar snakes in zoo cages, but had never contemplated living within the realm of actual encounter with such a beast. Tsotsi touched its scaly skin, full of admiration for Resahatli's prize. Madala peered into its round eye. Modise asked Resahatli what he would do with it. He began to explain as I turned away to lie in the shade. Resahatli scraped snake's meat to use as ingredients for his medicines. He flattened the skin, stretched it out, and pegged it down across the Luapa floor. After picking the skeleton clean, he draped it along the edge of the kitchen shelter roof for all to see. I sit under his decor, feeling strength again. The morning sun warms my back. When it was low in the eastern sky, Tsotsi rode off to school, and we lit only a small fire to cook our tea. It is relief to everyone that we no longer need shiver and huddle by the fire in the early morning. Madala, with a lamb trailing behind him, wanders to the field, and I marvel that I have no fears. As often as I've searched for firewood or picked morojo in the field, I've never come across a snake. It was a tick, so small that I didn't see it, which caused my only illness, and except for this recent bout, this has been our healthiest year. I write in the shade of the kitchen shelter, preparing for class, while Resakali works near me, pounding his medicines. We take turns breaking the silence. Look to the fields, Mosari Moholo. Madala is teaching the little lamb to chase down butterflies. He calls, "Come, come," and the little lamb runs to his feet. Resakatli, it is a sweet twosome in the field, but not so when they are in the Loapa. When Madala walks into the hut, the lamb follows him in and relieves itself. Madala and lamb walk out, and I'm left wiping the floor. We see Sepati coming from a distance. With a bundle on her head, she's on her way to town. She stops to bring the news. Molema is back from the mines. Number 19, he says, is alive and well. Number 19 sends his greetings. No money, just his greetings. Like a peacock, he twirls himself about and forgets his family. Sepati disappears toward the sun. The blue sky is hopeful with clouds. The days and nights have been glorious, dry and warm, with just enough brief afternoon showers to benefit Resakati's newly planted fields. Soon we'll look for sprouted seeds. Resakati has actually been feeding the chickens to divert their attentions, and as a result they are laying more eggs. Nixon and I continue to compete. The whole day lies before us as Resakatli and I sit together under the snake skeleton. Let the snakes decorate our homestead. I simply trust this environment and have come to appreciate this outdoor life.